This is a story of my first encounter with the paranormal that I can remember. I was about 8 or 9 years old playing with my little cousins at their parents' house during a family gathering. Behind their house is a large forest located in northeast Florida. My cousins, their neighbor, and I were playing hide and seek in the forest, and the only rule their parents had was to stay within sight of the house. Of course, we didn't listen. I was getting bored of the game and wanted to do some exploring. I convinced the other kids to join me as we headed deeper into the forest. I noticed this ball of light floating in midair. I thought I was seeing things. I remember rubbing my eyes just to make sure it wasn't in my head. I asked my cousins if they saw it too, and when I pointed it out, they confirmed it was there. It was bright and bobbed back and forth, changing from a yellowish color to a transparent green hue. We followed it for, I can't remember how long, but we reached a small cabin, and the orb disappeared. It was dusk at this point, and curiosity got the best of me. My cousins and the neighbor kid were too scared to go up to it, but I peeked inside the window. I saw a dim light inside, and what I thought was a human skull sitting on a table next to some jars. Then a shadow from within moved across the far wall. I got chills and signaled the other kids to run back the way we came, and I took off immediately behind them. We ran as fast as we could and didn't stop until we were inside the house, and I locked the door behind us. I remember getting in trouble because our parents couldn't see us from the kitchen window. I didn't tell my mom or anyone else what I saw because I didn't want to scare my cousins or worry our parents. To be frank, I'm not sure if even what I think I saw was there. Later that night, I woke up to the sounds of helicopters and dogs barking outside. It was well past midnight, and I asked my mom, who was standing in the kitchen with the rest of the adults who stayed over after the party, what was going on. They all had their eyes glued to whatever was happening in the backyard through the kitchen window. She said they found a body of a woman in the forest and a cabin where her killer was staying, and there was a manhunt going on. I remember not being able to sleep the rest of the night, and the glaring white lights that shone through the folds of the blinds from the helicopters above. I'm still not sure what that orb was. Maybe it was the spirit of the woman, trying to lead someone to her killer. I'm not even sure if one of the other kids told anyone about the cabin we saw, and if it was one of the parents that called the police. I just remember us not being allowed to even go near the tree line anymore when we visited, and after that night I never wanted to anyway. I'm 24 now, and have had many other experiences since then. But this is one that I actually forgot about and was reminded of recently when reading up on will-o'-the-wisps. Thought I'd share where it all began for me. So my story begins in the sticks of Missouri at an old campsite. For a few years, everyone on my mom's side of the family would meet and stay at this campsite owned by a family friend. It lies on the Mississippi and is miles away from any town. It's about 20 acres overall of mostly cleared land, but with woods lining the perimeter, and has a pool, cafeteria, mess hall, gymnasium, and about 10 cabins. It sits next to an old plantation house that was turned into a stop on the Underground Railroad. It has a secret room behind the fireplace that held people. Anyway, my mother, her siblings, and my grandmother all went to camp there when they were about 10 to 13 years old. So this place is at least 90 years old. There are signatures all over the cabin interior from past campers, dating from the early 20th century, perhaps earlier, to the present. The aunts and female cousins, myself included, stayed in one cabin while the men stayed in another, and my brother and one cousin decided to be bold and stay in one up the hill by themselves. Needless to say, they didn't get much sleep that night and were pretty creeped out the next day. But this isn't their story. On my side of the room, we had pushed the beds together, 3 of them, to make sort of a giant combo bed. I was on the bottom of a bunk bed at the edge of the combo bed, furthest from the half-screened wooden door. My cousin A was on the top bunk, and 2 other cousins were to my right in the next beds. So after the last day, we were winding down from all the activities and fun, and were telling stories until we eventually drifted to sleep, one by one. A few hours later, I awoke for no apparent reason, but when I looked toward the screen, I saw blonde, whitish hair bouncing about outside. I didn't think much of it, because my cousin who was with my brother had a big blonde afro at the time. I figured they were just messing around and went back to sleep. A bit later, I awoke again and saw a complete apparition of a woman standing in the center of the cabin, rapidly surveying the room. She was almost completely opaque white, about 85%, dressed in 19th century working class garb, apron, long-sleeved dress, and a disheveled bun. She was looking around the room and, to me, seemed confused as to what we were all doing in there, but I did not feel that she was a negative presence. At this point, I was still in a stupor from having been awoken in the middle of the night, so I grabbed my flashlight that was right next to me, shined it on her, and said, "What?" in a whisper yell. When the light hit her, she vanished. When she vanished, I felt unable to comprehend what had happened, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, I had somewhat of a remembrance of what had happened, but I didn't want to tell anyone out of fear of having it dismissed as nothing and no one believing me. We were all getting ready for the day and walking to the mess hall for lunch when my cousin A asked me if I'd seen anything weird in the night. Shocked and relieved, I recounted the story to her. Apparently, she had awoken just before me and saw the woman in the room. Not knowing how to react, she slowly turned over and tried to fall asleep again. Moments later, she heard me click my flashlight and exclaim. She said she also didn't feel that the woman was a negative presence and thought she looked as though she was checking up on us, making sure everything and everyone was okay. We recently went back over the story together, and it turns out we've both experienced unexplainable things throughout our lives. We had just never talked to anyone about it because we assumed no one would understand or want to understand. She suggested we possess some sort of sensitivity to these kinds of energies, and since realizing it in herself has honed her abilities. I agree. And the fact that we were the only two to feel her and wake up to her seems significant. Anyway, we told the story to the rest of the family and everyone was spooked. We haven't returned to the campsite since. I assume it's because everyone assumes no one would want to go again because of what happened. But like A and I said, she wasn't malefic at all, and I would be happy to go again. So, me, my boyfriend, his best friend, and his girlfriend drove up to Big Bear on June 26th, Then, one day later, another friend of ours drove up, June 27th, and he was supposed to sleep downstairs, and couples sleep upstairs, since they're only 2 bedrooms. The first night we stayed there, it was kind of creepy because the cabin was pretty remote. And of course, there are absolutely no lights outside. It is the woods with coyotes howling and bears, but nonetheless, completely normal activity. On the 27th, around 12 a.m., my boyfriend and I were in bed when suddenly our friend sleeping downstairs came banging on the door, freaking out, saying he saw shadows in the woods and that the motion light came on and there was thumping outside. We got a little freaked, but my boyfriend got out of bed and checked the entire cabin and even went outside. Nothing. We went up to the other couple's room where there's a porch with a sliding glass door that looks out to the woods. It's important to note that I am a naturally very anxious and scared person, while my boyfriend is a rock. He's calm and logical, while I tend to jump to the worst scenario. My boyfriend went over to check the last place in the cabin, so he pulled the curtain and jumped and yelled, "Oh my God!" At this point, I was terrified. My boyfriend is a 180-pound CrossFit coach, and to see a big guy like that scared is nauseating. He locked the door and backed away slowly. He quietly said, "There's a large man standing outside, staring at us. He's just standing in the woods, looking at us." At this point, I'm thinking he's messing with me. He looked at me and said, "Go lock the door." That's when I knew he was serious. Everyone was freaking out. I ran and locked the door behind him, and we all decided to stay in the room to keep an eye out. It's the middle of summer, and it's really hot, but we refused to open a window. I was so scared, but trying not to show it, as everyone else seemed to have calmed down. About 30 minutes went by, nothing happened. I got annoyed with the heat and the fact that there were 5 people in a tiny room, and 3 of them were men. So my boyfriend and I went back to our room. I was still pretty spooked, so my boyfriend tried to cheer me up. At this point, it was about 1:30 a.m. I told him I was too scared to sleep with the lights off. He told me that was totally fine, and he understood, so we just lay with the lights completely on. Finally, I started drifting to sleep when I heard a thud. I sat up and looked at my boyfriend. He looked at me. Then, the power cut. I immediately started sobbing. I was trembling, and I couldn't see anything because it was pitch black. I tried to get out of bed and run, but my legs got tangled in the sheets, and I fell. My boyfriend picked me up, and we grabbed our phones and ran to the other room where everyone else was staying. I was hysterical at this point. I tried to contact our host, but nothing would go through. I tried to call my dad, but all of our phones said no service. We were alone out there. Thank God the friend who drove up after us had a different carrier because his phone had 1 bar, so he called the local sheriff. I realize now it's a bit of an overreaction, but at the time we thought we were gonna die. He was on the phone with the sheriff, and they transferred us to the utility company. We gave the address, and they told us that we were too far in the woods, and they don't cover that area. At this point, we were wondering if the entire area had no power, or if the man outside had just cut our powers. I cried more, and we called 911 to report suspicious activity and a power outage. They sent the fire department. A few hours went by, it was 3 a.m., and suddenly the power came back on. We fell asleep, and the next day we talked to some locals in the area. We told them our power went out, and one said that was strange and shouldn't have happened. He told us the only reason that happens out here is because of a snowstorm. He said he couldn't explain it. So, to the man in the woods who might have cut our power, let's not meet.